Hello, I'm Lee Rendell from Kaspersky. In today's session, we're going to take a look at our MDR findings. What we're going to take a look at is a 3-month period of our MDR, Managed Detection Response operations. This includes industries analysed, the severity of reported incidents by industry, and the nature of high severity incidents, adversarial TTPs and detection technologies used to catch them, along with some key recommendations. But before we dig into the trending insights, I'd like to provide some background on our approach our services uses to detect these incidents. It's our perception that the only way to counter the modern threat landscape is to adopt a systematic approach to protection. This implies having effective prevention mechanisms in place to stop the majority of cyber threats automatically. The more effective prevention mechanisms you have in place, the less security incidents are raised that have to be dealt with by human analysts. Prevention layers stop activities that should be 100% malicious. However, according to our research, the modern attack framework looks very similar to legitimate activity, and we're all aware of the special term living off the land, when the attack is performed using no malware at all, and may even be used without using files, known as malwareless or fileless attacks. Usually, these sort of attacks can't be automatically prevented, as there is a risk that it could affect legitimate business processes. So, it requires an investigation by the security operations team. But still, they can at least be detected automatically, which gives the security analyst a hint of where to start their investigation from. And then here come target attacks. Those attacks are tailored to a particular victim, meaning there's a great chance that all the tools used and techniques are completely new, and we might not even have any automatic detection logic for these. In this situation, the only option is to detect them using threat hunting, and this is normally a manual process, and it can be compared to our own internal threat research. That allows us to maintain consistently high detection rates of our products. But in this case, we apply threat hunting practices to the customer's telemetry to hunt for completely new threats inside their infrastructure. And last but not least, it's an important point that the output from our threat hunting goes straight into our detection and prevention technologies. Because once we detect a threat manually, we then need to be able to detect it or prevent against it automatically where possible. Now let's look at the concept of the hunt. While a self-propagating malware without really any human management is efficiently prevented automatically by an anti-malware engine, a more human-driven or human-centric attack requires a human analyst on the defending side to spot suspicious behavior, investigate it, and determine the most effective response tactics. Detectors that we use to spot suspicious behavior are internally called hunts. Historically, they're born from manual threat hunting practices, and this explains their name. Our products use more or less the same hunts, where they're officially called indicators of attack, IOAs. These IOAs are prone, however, to false positives, but on the other hand, they are capable of detecting stealthy behavior and show the SOC analysts where to start their investigation from and what to pay their attention to among billions and billions of raw telemetry events. IOAs are always the basis of alert creation logic. If you do something, you have to be able to measure it. And this is the only way to be sure that what you're doing is right and you're doing it in the right way. Hunts are also measured. For each hunt, we calculate several metrics. The most important ones are conversion. Conversion shows the effectiveness of detection logic. It is the ratio of the number of incidents to the number of alerts. Simply speaking, it shows us how many alerts were converted to actual incidents. Contribution. Contribution shows the efficiency. It answers the question, what proportion of the total number of reported incidents were detected using this particular hunt? Very often, hunts with good conversion have bad contribution, and vice versa. For example, PowerShell-related hunts have pretty low conversion, but very high contribution, and that's why these metrics should always be reviewed and reviewed carefully. And then mean time to investigate. Our Purple team, responsible for all of our hunts development, and is also part of our internal SOC, and of course, they are the last escalation line for difficult cases. Each hunt has internal documentation that analysts on the operational lines can use during an investigation. To investigate a hunt-based alert, analysts has always to search through raw data and build some kind of timeline. What happened before the hunt was triggered and what happened right after. The more data that is required, the more time it takes. Searching through docs and communications with the hunt's author, searching through raw data, It takes time, and this time indirectly characterizes the quality of the hunt. Our detection engineering group work in agile 2-week sprints. The hunt's metrics are also calculated once every 2 weeks. If any hunts show low conversion and contribution rates, then it's subject to further review. And SOC analysts are people. They sometimes make mistakes. As a compensation mechanism, we have several internal review processes to proactively detect systematic mistakes and take appropriate measures. Within these processes, we try to identify what hunt caused the analyst to make the biggest number of errors during their investigation. And this is also then subject to a hunt review. And all of our hunts are linked to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. First, this gives additional contextual information to help support our SOC analysts. And secondly, it is considered the detection logic when the possible attacker's path is calculated. From an analytics point of view, this may also be used for assessing techniques' efficiency and popularity. So let's move on now to our statistics and findings. We've learned a little bit about how our managed detection response internals work. Now let's dive more into our findings. If we look at the industries analysed, our MDR service is used in almost all industry verticals. The green bars show the number of customers and the grey bars reflect the number of reported incidents. You may note that the number of incidents does not always follow the number of customers. We have many customers from financial and IT industries, but the number of incidents in these verticals is not that big. This may be a sign that they implement more efficient cybersecurity measures, or they're less valuable to attackers. Now let's look at the telemetry processing timeline. We've already discussed the technical side of our telemetry processing pipeline. Now let's see the actual numbers. Currently, we have several 100,000 endpoints in monitoring, and each of them sends on average about 15,000 raw events per day. This number, however, directly depends on the activity of hosts and can vary greatly. Usually it's upwards. MDR pipeline automatically processes received data, and that resulted in about 65,000 alerts for a 3-month period, with 1/3 of them being automatically resolved by our MDR AI analyst, essentially the machine learning engine inside MDR. The remaining 43,000 alerts were investigated by our SOC team, and that resulted in little more than 1,500 true positive incidents reported to customers. If we look at the severity level reported incidents, in our SOC we must avoid subjectivity, and that's why internally we have pretty clear instructions on how we classify incidents. And here is a simple explanation. Incidents with high severity are either human-driven or human-centric, or malware-related incidents with actual or potential huge impact. During the 3-month period, we had less than 1/10 of such incidents. If we don't see any signs of human-driven attack, but the impact is still possible, this is classed as a medium severity incident. And in cases where there's no impact, it's classed as a low severity incident. And in practice, medium severity incidents are usually related to malware that was missed by an anti-malware engine, while low severity incidents are generally connected to PUPs or potential monitoring programs. The share of medium and low severity incidents was 72% and 19%. Now let's take a look at the severity of incidents by verticals. We can see that almost all industries experience all types of incidents. Only mass media sector had no high severity incidents. The number of high severity incidents in all sectors was pretty close to the average of 9%, except government, financial and IT. As we see later, these sectors really suffered from many human-centric attacks, but these all worked slightly differently. Now let's take a look at the nature of high severity incidents. Internally, we classify incidents not only by the severity level, but also by the nature of that incident. And when we're talking about the nature of high severity incidents, we distinguish APTs and target attacks, any attack that simulates activity or red teaming internally, artifacts of any previous human-driven activity like last memory dumps or Kirby files in suspicious folders, or evidence of malicious activity or persistence, malware with impact like ransomware outbreak. Yes, we may not see any signs of human activity between these attacks, but the potential impact is huge. And obviously we all remember the impact of WannaCry and Expeta, and we see many high-profile attacks over the last year or so. Denial of service with impact and inside of impact and successful social engineering all make up our high severity impact. And we saw all of these except denial of service and insider during that 3-month period. We can see that the overall number of organizations affected by different types of high severity incidents on the left and the overall number of such incidents on the right. It's interesting to note that almost 1/3 of all reported high severity incidents were related to real human-driven target attacks, and more than 1/4 of organizations experienced this type of attack. On the second and third places were malware outbreaks and offensive exercises. Artifacts of previous attacks and social engineering concludes the statistics. If we look at the distribution of high severity incidents by industries, it's pretty interesting. The first thing we note is that APT artifacts almost always found alongside active APTs in a network. This proves that if an organization recovered in the past from an APT attack, they're often attacked again, and presumably this is by the same actor. Secondly, APT targeted sectors usually conduct red teaming exercises that mimic and demonstrate APT activity. This shows the correct risk assessment and their understanding of the threat landscape related to their organizations. Third is that high impact malware outbreaks were observed in all sectors. This shows the importance of modern anti-malware solutions and should still be in high demand, because in the case of a malware attack, the time to respond is crucial and can only be delivered by automated prevention technologies, such as a modern endpoint protection platforms. NDR services can help to identify the root cause of an attack and suggest effective corrective mechanisms moving forward. The fourth thing to note is that social engineering is also a very popular type of attack. It is planned and executed by human attackers, and it's very efficient on their side. The statistics demonstrate that raising employee security awareness is a never-ending process, but it's something that we should not put off. Attackers are always finding new ways to trick users, so we need to constantly train our staff and upskill them. Now, if we move on to what may be the most interesting section of today's session, we'll talk a little bit about the sensors used in our MDR and the detected adversarial techniques, tactics, and procedures. Let's first look at the tactics used at the moment of detection. As I mentioned earlier, all of our incidents contain a list of related MITRE tactics and techniques. The diagram shows the MITRE enterprise techniques at the moment of detection. Most incidents that we observed were detected at the initial access stage, but we also detected a lot on lateral movement, command and control, persistence, and the execution attack stages. The fact that execution is only 5th on the list demonstrates that we don't register incidents for each anti-malware detection, but only those that have potentially high or very bad consequences to an organization. Detection technologies used in our MDR support several detection technologies. Roughly, they can be divided into endpoint, sandbox, and network intrusion detection systems. Sandbox and network IDS are part of our Gartner product, Kaspersky Anti-Target Attack. The diagram shows how many incidents were detected by each sensor type. Detection technology efficiency on different tactics. From detection engineering point of view, it's always interesting to understand which sensors is the most efficient and when. So as we can see, a sandbox is the most efficient technology on the network perimeter. Most attacks on initial access stages were detected by this. Network IDS, on the other hand, is very important for the internal communication and command and control stages. And tactics like execution, persistence, previous escalation, defense evasion, credentials access take place on the endpoint, and therefore detection on the endpoint works well and the best in these cases. Host intrusion detection system is part of our endpoint security product, and due to this, we see its efficient work in detecting the lateral movement stage. On this slide, we can see the most popular techniques for each tactic and what sensors were able to detect them. In addition to already mentioned initial access, where mainly sandbox and network IDS work, and command and control, where mainly network IDS demonstrates its efficiency, it's important to note that exfiltration over alternative protocols is pretty popular, and here only network IDS can help. Sandbox demonstrated comparative efficiency to the endpoint in detection popular techniques on execution and previous escalation. Now let's take a look at the most popular techniques. In 1/3 of all reported incidents, we observe phishing. That means that this is prevalent technique to gain initial access onto organizations. In second place is exploitation of remote services. And in pretty much all cases, these were attempts to exploit remote code execution in SMB, just like Eternal Blue. The third place is taken by the application layer protocols technique. Its popularity shows that adversaries usually use standard protocols for command and control and not trying to reinvent the wheel here. It's interesting to note that command and script interpreter takes only 4th place. This can be explained by the fact that this technique is used to achieve execution tactics. But these attacks were detected and prevented earlier on the initial access stage. Now let's move on very quickly to the living off the land tools. In our analysis, we can say that PowerShell is very popular in all types of incidents. Another interesting thing is less popular utilities in all incidents were pretty popular in only high severity incidents. This on the one hand may be due to wide variety of tools used in high severity incidents and their more bespokeness. And on the other hand, this demonstrates that usually tools used in high severity incidents are not so popular in most cases. Now let's take a look at some of the key takeaways from today's session. 1/3 of all high severity incidents were human driven or human centric attacks, and to detect them we need a combination of manual threat hunting and classic alert detection monitoring. And this should be implemented in all networks. Professional red team exercises are very similar to advanced target attacks and therefore a very good approach for an organization to assess their operational security and their efficiency to defend themselves. 9% of all high severity incidents use successful social engineering attacks, and this demonstrates the continual need to train your staff in security awareness training. We should be ready to detect threats on all tactics, and even complex attacks consist of simple steps and techniques. Detection of popular techniques can reveal the whole attack kill chain. It's very important to implement different detection technologies as they are efficient in detecting different types of adversary techniques. And to maintain a high severity level of security, all these should be monitored and reviewed. And that's it from today's session. I hope you found our insight into our MDR service interesting, and there's some key takeaways for you to utilize.